Film is art. It's indisputable that the creativity, thought, effort, composition, writing, design, most every part of the process of making a film reinforces the idea that it's art. Are video games art? Yeah. Sure. Maybe, yeah. Yes. No, for sure, yes, it is. No, it definitely is. Yeah, it's leaning towards yes. That question was hard to answer for a while, but the creativity of it has bursted through the language of hitboxes, math, coding, and for the simple fact that it's a game. That creativity broke through and expanded its reach, farther than people thought it would. As the tools for storytelling developed for film, so did video games. In fact, a lot of the technology goes hand in hand. For movies using digital characters like The Lord of the Rings, Avatar, Avengers, they used motion capture and eventually performance capture. Characters could look more fantastical than ever and be believable in their action because it wasn't a puppeteer, but an actor. Another leap in technique was using the volume in things like The Mandalorian and The Batman. It challenges filming on blue screens and even location scouting if done correctly. Plus, it's highly customizable because it's being rendered in real time on Unreal Engine. But more on that in a bit. Something even crazier people may not know about is the use of virtual reality. Looking back at The Batman again, Matt Reeves talks about its use during pre-production.
Then, when we're making the movie, as we're prepping, I kind of lay out the shots. This movie, I did it in VR, so I was able to go into the sets before we ever shot and made all of these shots that you're seeing, the shots you're talking about in VR.
These innovations are instrumental in bringing that fantasy to the silver screen. The digital space is key in showing these grander stories, but video games use these same technologies all the time, whether it's to make a blockbuster game or a touching story. Motion capture was being used even when characters looked like they were paper mache. Performances were cobbled together with animation and voice work.
Where did he take him?
But now with performance capture, where they record audio and track their face as well, there's a level of realism to performance that brings a greater connection to the stories presented. Unreal Engine, the tool behind the volume, has been used as a game engine for years, and still continues to be used as such to make games of the highest quality whilst having a free and open toolset. Its fidelity has become so widespread that its potential in games is still being realized. So much so that film has now tapped into that potential of real-time digital rendering. And who can forget VR? Matt Reeves used the point of view as an asset where some filmmakers and games use it as a different medium. Games like Half-Life Alyx enthrall the player in this dystopian alien-controlled society with spectacle and interactivity. It acknowledges you're a person in that world whilst playing. That simple adjustment makes it not feel like a theme park ride and more like an experience that's being lived through the eyes of this character. The technology present nowadays even allows games to transition straight into cinematics, or vice versa.
Go on, don't lose him!
The blending of the mediums just doesn't stop at technology though. What is the use of all this if it isn't used effectively? Games take influence in their storytelling from film because it's a language that people understand, and they understand it well. Now what's interesting is story can be told during gameplay.
These posters are everywhere.
I saw this, not before the outbreak.
In the environment, even in the items you pick up. But when the game tells the player to take a break and listen, the player now tends to listen. Because the biggest thing that moves the plot, the cinematics, has made itself known. Even homages to filmmakers exist, like in Ghost of Tsushima. From the beginning of the samurai game, the player can decide to play in a Kurosawa mode, where it's black and white with a film grain effect. The player can even choose to have the cast speak in Japanese with a lip sync. Games take the composition seriously, not just through gimmicks, but even in the camera work in games like God of War, Halo, and Hellblade. They boast it being one shot through the whole game, which in a digital space doesn't seem that hard, but it is considering that the camera is tracked in these scenes with actors in performance capture. Maybe covering cuts is easier considering the camera can literally be keyframed in between instead of a wipe, but the blocking from scene to scene is still there. And again, it's not just because they can. These characters are going on journeys in all of these games. The choice of one shot makes the comprehension of that journey so much more grand and yet cohesive. So it's established that games can keep up, but how are they special? Can they move us or do anything different than films that are novel to the medium? Yes, and it's because of one simple reason: control. Up is a film that is lauded for its emotional opening sequence. Not every film can make people cry by the end, and even fewer can somewhere in the second act. But the beginning, that's an achievement. So, how did it do it? It makes the audience learn as much about the characters in the quickest amount of time whilst not giving whiplash. It looks at the entire life of Carl and Ellie, from their ups and downs leading up to Ellie's death. It even shows Carl beginning to mourn, but that's when the film shifts to the adventure that Carl was always looking for. Getting connected to those characters so expertly, so quickly, is what made the tragedy of Ellie's death hit hard enough for the floodgates to open. Without that, the empathy isn't there for the viewer. They don't care the way they should. It's hard to find any other examples that pull this off, but there is one that comes to mind. The Last of Us is a critically acclaimed game for multiple reasons. It's beautiful, its gameplay was unique for the time, but most importantly, it told one of the best narratives games had seen up until that point. It was a shifting point in which the games industry fully understood how good a story could be in this medium. The best place to look for this at work is right from the beginning. The first time I played it, in the first 15 minutes, I cried. Why? Because it did exactly what Up did, but uniquely within the medium. Joel is the main character, who starts out just getting home from work to see his daughter has gotten him a birthday present for him to open, just before it becomes the next day. But soon it's apparent that something is wrong with the neighbors, and even the whole town. It's the start of a global epidemic of zombie-like fungal-possessed monsters. They try to escape, but as they reach the outskirts of town, they're saved by the military. But that same officer is ordered to contain and eliminate the perceived threat. Joel and his daughter Sarah are shot at, but rescued at the last second. Except Sarah's too wounded.
Listen to me. I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right. I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby. Please. I know, baby. I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. 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 Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
It wasn't the horror of the epidemic that took everything Joel loved, but the people around him that chose survival. This scene hits very hard. Is it because of great writing, great shot choice, and narrative gameplay? Of course. But the one element that brings forth the connection that was only possible in seeing the entire life of the protagonist leading up to the death is done instead with one choice: who you control. For about 90% of the opening, you don't actually play Joel. You play as Sarah. You become her motivations, her sleepy movement, her personality coming through in her room. You look at the card you forgot to give him, the soccer picture with you and your dad, and her walking to her dad's room after getting a distress call from her Uncle Tommy. You see your dad kill his crazed neighbor, him not helping people on the side of the road, him doing everything he can to protect you. Just like Up, the importance of who dies and who grieves them is translated to the viewer to not just be broken about the death, but those who deal with it as well. The most interesting part is you could miss all of that. You could not look around her room. You could not go to your dad's room either and just walk down the stairs. You could be looking the other way and miss what helps that connection. But the way the game is designed, most everybody will not miss it. Everything was orchestrated that this would happen no matter what. Yet, the simple act of moving a joystick to reveal the narrative brings us as close to a 13-year-old girl in 10 minutes of her short life as an audience feels watching a compressed 10 minutes of Ellie's entire life. The canonical deaths of characters weigh heavily in games. Sure, it's narrative, but the fact of the matter is games make you immersed, and that makes deaths feel more real. At the end of Red Dead Redemption 1, the protagonist John Marston dies a gruesome death. I was 11, and that was the first time I cried at an artistic medium. Even though I could barely comprehend plot lines in movies, I played that character for tens of hours. I was attached whether I knew it or not. But so what? Why was I sent over the edge? Because the credits don't roll yet. You're immediately put in the shoes of John Marston's son. There's no direction given on how to finally get the credits, so you may or may not stop playing there. Either way, without starting a new game, you're never playing John again, at least not knowing that his time is fleeting. Films can be started over as well with the knowledge of which characters die, but they don't continue on well after the story finishes to let the loss of life sink in. Look at Red Dead Redemption 2. The protagonist, Arthur Morgan, about halfway through the game gets diagnosed with tuberculosis. It affects mechanics, Arthur coughs randomly in cinematics, and even loses weight drastically. His death isn't sudden, but in the late 19th century, it's a death sentence. The connection with this character is so strong that it's sad to see the state he's in. So much so that when the game came out, Google searches for the cure to tuberculosis skyrocketed. Because of the nature of the medium, players thought maybe they could save Arthur, find the cure somewhere, but instead, Arthur took it for what it was, and depending on players' choices, turned his life around before he passed. These games are received just as much, if not more intensely, than the young yet slightly older medium of film. In fact, the games industry makes as much as the films industry and music industry combined. It stands to reason that many of what makes a film successful is what helps games reach those heights. Games have something to say. Without film, who knows what stories could be told? Film has come a long way from sunlit stage plays to odysseys that touch our soul. So too has the ones and zeros in the background come to cultivate fantasies to get absolutely lost in. Yes, video games are art, but it lends its success to the guiding force of film. Although they sometimes seem at odds, these mediums go hand in hand. Not because they are both arts, but because they both speak the same language. Storytelling is art.